You got the clock? That ugly, broken clock? Ha! Figures! That's all you're worth to this family. Those words came out of my aunt's mouth at my grandmother's funeral. Not even 24 hours after we buried the woman who raised half of us, and my family was already dividing up the spoils like vultures circling a carcass. My name is Maya. I'm 31 years old, and I thought I knew my family. Turns out grief doesn't reveal who people are. Money does. My grandmother, Nana Ruth, passed away 3 weeks ago after a long battle with her heart. She was 82, sharp as a tack until the very end, and she built her wealth from nothing. A seamstress who turned a 2-bedroom house into a real estate empire over 50 years. She was the kind of woman who ironed her dollar bills and remembered every birthday without a reminder. When the will was read, the chaos started immediately. My uncle screamed about the beachfront property. My cousins fought over her jewelry collection. My mom cried, not from grief, but because she didn't get the savings account she assumed she was getting. And me? I got a scratched-up vintage clock from 1962. No cash, no property, just a dusty old clock that didn't even work anymore. Everyone laughed, literally laughed at me. But here's the thing. I laughed last. And I need to ask you something before I tell you the rest of this story. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Because what I found inside that clock changed absolutely everything. And honestly, I'm still not sure if what I did next makes me the villain or the hero. Let me take you back to the day of the will reading, because you need to understand just how ugly it got before I can tell you how it all fell apart for them. Nana Ruth's attorney, a calm, older gentleman named Mr. Hargrove, sat at the head of a long dining table in her house, the same table where she used to serve Sunday dinners to the entire family, the same table where she taught me to sew when I was 7. And now, that table was surrounded by people I barely recognized, people wearing their grief like a costume while their eyes darted around the room, mentally calculating what everything was worth. My Uncle Darren, my mom's older brother, had already walked the property twice that morning. I saw him pacing the backyard with his phone out, probably pulling up Zillow. His wife, Cheryl, had already opened Nana's jewelry box, just to look. I watched her slip a gold bracelet into her cardigan pocket and then smile at me like nothing happened. And my mom. My own mother sat across from me with her arms crossed, already rehearsing what she was going to say if she didn't get what she wanted. She'd been telling people for years that Nana promised her the lake house. No one ever heard Nana say that. But my mom had been saying it so long, I think she actually believed it herself. That's the family I come from. When Mr. Hargrove read the will, the room went from tense to explosive in under 3 minutes. Uncle Darren got the main house. His daughter Brianna, my cousin, who visited Nana maybe twice a year, got the lake house. My mom received a savings account with $40,000 in it, which sounds like a lot until you realize she'd been expecting 10 times that. Various cousins split up furniture, vehicles, and remaining cash. And then Mr. Hargrove looked up at me over his glasses and said very quietly, "To my granddaughter, Maya, I leave the clock on my bedroom mantel. She'll know what to do with it." Silence, and then laughter. My cousin Tyler, who is 27 and has never held a job for longer than 4 months, actually pointed at me and laughed out loud. "The clock? The broken clock?" He slapped the table. "No way, that's hilarious." My Aunt Cheryl, the one who pocketed the bracelet, gave me this look, this pitying look, which was somehow worse than the laughter. And then she said the words I told you at the beginning. "You got the clock? That ugly, broken clock? Ha! Figures! That's all you're worth to this family." I didn't cry. I wanted to. But I looked down at my hands and I breathed, and I did not give a single one of them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. What hurt the most wasn't the clock. It was that no one defended me, not even my mother. She just looked away, like I was embarrassing her by existing in that moment. I picked up the clock after the meeting. It was heavier than I expected. Solid brass casing, Roman numerals, the hands frozen at 3:17. It smelled like Nana's bedroom, like lavender and old books. I took it home and I put it on my kitchen counter and I cried for about 2 hours straight. Not because I wanted the money, but because I realized that everyone in my family had shown me, clearly and without apology, exactly how much they valued me. For 3 days, I barely touched the clock. I'd look at it sometimes while making coffee. It felt like a goodbye from Nana, a personal one, separate from everything else. But it also stung. Why hadn't she left me something more? I knew I wasn't entitled to her estate, but I'd been the one visiting her every single week for the last 4 years. I drove her to chemotherapy. I sat with her through the nights when the pain was bad and she couldn't sleep. I learned her recipes. I listened to her stories. Did none of that matter? On the 4th night, I couldn't sleep. I came downstairs around 2 a.m. and just sat there staring at the clock. And something Nana used to say came back to me. Maya, the most valuable things in life are never on the surface. You have to look deeper. She said that to me about a dozen times over the years. I always thought she meant it as general life advice. But something shifted in me that night, sitting there in the dark. I picked up the clock. I turned it over. And I noticed something I hadn't before. The back panel was slightly loose. Not broken, loosened. Deliberately, carefully, like someone had opened it recently. My hands were shaking when I pried it open. Inside the clock's casing, tucked behind the movement mechanism, wrapped in a small square of fabric, Nana's fabric, the same floral cotton she used to make my childhood dresses, was a small brass key. And taped to the inside of the back panel, in Nana's unmistakable handwriting, was a note. My darling Maya, the ones who love you for what you give them will always overlook what you actually give them. Safety Deposit Box 447, First National Bank on Clover Street. You were the only one I was never afraid to trust. Nana Ruth, P.S. You're going to be just fine. I read it 4 times. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor and I completely fell apart. But this time, not from grief. From something I hadn't felt in days. Love. Pure, deliberate, chosen love. I went to the bank the next morning before it even opened. I was the 3rd person in line. When they escorted me to the vault and I slid that brass key into box 447, I wasn't sure what to expect. What I found inside stopped my breath. There were 3 things: a sealed letter from Nana Ruth's attorney, a second letter, separate from the will, a document from a financial institution I didn't recognize, and a USB drive. The attorney's letter explained everything. Nana Ruth had, over the course of the last decade, quietly moved her most significant assets out of the estate that would go through probate. She'd established a private trust, and she had named me as the sole beneficiary. I'm not going to share the exact number, but I will tell you this. It was not small. It was the kind of number that makes your vision blur and your ears ring. Real estate holdings in 3 states that no one in the family even knew existed. Investment accounts. A portfolio she'd built quietly, methodically, without telling a single soul. The USB drive contained video files, recordings Nana had made herself on her iPad over the last 2 years. In them, she explained everything. She talked about watching her children and grandchildren and seeing who they were becoming. She talked about the ones who called only when they needed something. She talked about Cheryl stealing from her jewelry box. She knew she'd watched it happen on her security camera and said nothing, just quietly moved her most precious pieces somewhere safe. She talked about Darren pressuring her to put the house in his name for tax purposes. She talked about the cousins who treated her home like a hotel. And then she looked directly into the camera and she said, "Maya is the only one who ever came just to come. She never asked me for a single thing, and that is exactly why she gets everything that matters." Here's where the plot thickens, and where I made a decision that I'm honestly still processing. I found out through Mr. Hargrove that my family had already hired their own attorney to contest the will. Before I even knew about the safety deposit box, they were building a case. Darren claimed Nana had been mentally compromised in her final years. He was going to argue the will wasn't valid. They had no idea about the trust, The trust was ironclad, set up years before any of this, when Nana was perfectly sharp. It couldn't be contested the same way a will could. But when I learned they were already mounting a legal attack, that they'd been plotting this while standing at her graveside, while pretending to grieve, something in me went cold and clear. I called Mr. Hargrove. I told him I wanted to move quickly. I wanted everything transferred and secured before anyone could create complications. He told me the trust was already protected, but I wanted it airtight. And then I did something I had been going back and forth on. I made copies of Nana's video recordings, all of them, including the footage from her home security system that she had downloaded and saved, footage of Cheryl taking jewelry, footage of Darren going through her private files in her home office, footage of conversations where family members openly discussed how to speed up getting access to her estate. I sent those files to Mr. Hargrove. I didn't go to the family. I didn't call anyone. I didn't make a scene or send a dramatic group text. I just made sure that if they wanted a fight, every card was already on the table. When Darren's attorney reached out, Mr. Hargrove responded with a single document packet. I'm told the call lasted less than 4 minutes before they dropped everything. The fallout was immediate and brutal, but it wasn't directed at them. It was directed at me. My phone blew up. My mom called me 17 times in one afternoon. When I finally answered, she wasn't crying. She was furious. How could you do this to your own family, Maya? Your grandmother would be ashamed of you. I held the phone for a long moment. I thought about all the nights I spent in that hospital waiting room. I thought about the look on my aunt's face when she told me I wasn't worth anything more than a broken clock. I thought about my mom turning away from me at that table and saying nothing, and I said very calmly, "Grandma left me a message, Mom," in her own words, and in those words, she told me exactly what she thought. "You're welcome to believe whatever you need to believe." And I hung up. My cousin Tyler texted me, "You're literally the worst person I know." I screenshot it, added it to the file. The hardest part wasn't the anger. It was the silence from the people who I thought might be different. A cousin I was close to as a kid, an aunt I used to like. They didn't defend me. They didn't reach out. They just went quiet. And that silence told me everything I needed to know about who was ever really in my corner. It's been 4 months since I sat on that kitchen floor holding Nana Ruth's note. I've done a lot of thinking since then. A lot of long walks, long nights, long conversations with myself in the mirror at 2 a.m. And here's where I've landed. I used every resource Nana left me exactly the way she would have wanted. I established a scholarship in her name at the community college she always talked about. I renovated the small house she grew up in, the one she never sold because she said it kept her honest, and turned it into a community center for seniors in her old neighborhood. And yes, I kept enough to build a life that's genuinely mine for the first time ever. I don't talk to most of my family anymore. That's not a dramatic declaration. It's just the quiet truth. The calls stopped, the texts stopped, and slowly the grief of losing them faded into something that felt less like loss and more like relief. Because here's what Nana knew that none of them ever figured out. The most dangerous thing you can do to a person who only values you for what you give them is to stop giving. They don't fight for you, they just move on to the next target. And that tells you everything. She didn't leave me a broken clock. She left me a test, but not a test for me. A test that she already ran on every single person in that family, over years, in quiet moments they didn't even notice. And she recorded the results. She was sharper than all of them combined, right up until the end. I think about her every day. So here's the question I keep coming back to. And I genuinely want your opinion on this. Am I in the wrong for securing what was legally and rightfully mine? For using the evidence Nana herself collected? For choosing peace over a family that showed me time and again exactly where I stood? I don't think I am. But I'm human. And some days it's complicated. The lesson I take from all of this is simple. Pay attention to who shows up, not when things are good, but when there's nothing in it for them. That's the real answer. If this story hit you somewhere real, drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if you believe that loyalty should mean something, that love isn't a transaction, subscribe, because this community is built on exactly that kind of truth. You deserve people in your life who would choose you even when the clock is broken.